You are listening to Fantha Tracks.
Because of the following special program, Wonder Woman and the Incredible Hulk will not be presented this evening.
It's time to get all your Star Wars news in a single file. This is Making Tracks. Here are your hosts, Mark Newbold and Mark Mulcaster.
That's not true. That's impossible.
You're listening to episode 97 of Making Tracks. I'm your co-host Mark Newbold, and joining me today is a man who, when he asks his girlfriend to dress up like a princess, it's not like Princess Leia, it's like Princess Kanisa. Mark, how you doing?
You've totally got my number on that one. I'm good, thanks, dude. Yeah, that is completely correct. Yeah, she wears a little pink bonnet and everything. Bless her. Moving on.
Can we have less talk about little pink bonnets, please? Okay. How are you? You doing well?
Yeah, I'm good, man. I'm all right. So I've opened up for the first time, really, since November 2019, my Boba Fett costume, because I've got a troop coming up with the UK Garrison in a couple of weeks' time. And I thought I should probably make sure that it is still Boba Fett and I don't look Boba Fett in it. And of course, as well, make sure everything is still correct and looking good and hasn't somehow broken in the 18 months that it's been sat in its box. And so far, so good. Everything looks pretty good and I was happy. It felt a little bit snug, but not completely like, oh my God, am I going to be able to wear this? So I'm really looking forward to it. How about you? How's things with you?
Been another busy week.
Yeah.
I mean, we've had loads happen. Not too many things have come into the house this week, so nothing I can actually... I'm looking, and usually it's next to my desk, but there's nothing here, so I don't think there's anything of note. How about you?
Well, I've got the Black Series 4-pack of comic figures that came out this week. In fact, I think they all landed on people's doorsteps who ordered them, at least from Star Action Toys this weekend. Yeah, I have got in my sweaty, greasy little hands a Jackson figure and a brilliant Darth Maul Sith Apprentice figure, and of course a controversial Carnor Jax figure.
Yes.
As well as the Heir to the Empire Luke Skywalker, and they do look amazing. So by far, obviously, the most striking artwork I think we've actually got on any Star Wars merchandise so far. One thing that is worth noting, because it's a little bit disappointing, is that the write-up, there's only about 3 lines of description. It just happens to be also in French and German, Spanish, and possibly even Italian. So it's basically 3 lines of text, but then obviously repeated in different languages. So I was a little bit disappointed by that. I was hoping for a little bit of a bigger blurb for each figure. But hey-ho, they're great figures. So yes, got to find some space for those very soon.
Oh, isn't that always the challenge? I ordered mine from All the Cool Stuff, so fingers crossed they'll be here this week. Very much looking forward to it. I know Cavan Scott tweeted about the Maul one, saying he thinks it's the best Maul figure that's ever been released.
Yeah, he looks really, really ripped and really eager to rip off some Jedi Padawan's head or something like that. So yeah, so definitely a good figure to get if you can get your hands on it.
Let's get straight into it because we have got loads to talk about. Emilia Clarke promoting her new comic series, Mother of Madness, which she herself describes as Fleabag meets Deadpool, which I think sounds like a wonderful description.
That's pretty cool.
For anything, yeah. She's got Marvel Secret Invasion coming up. Obviously, when she's talking about anything, her role in Solo, a Star Wars story, comes up, and she was asked once again about Kira, and she said, and used a very interesting phrase, I thought, she refers to Kira as unfinished business. She was asked, do you think Kira was undermining Dryden and Crimson Dawn all along? And she says, that's a really juicy one. I wrote pages about Kira, behind the scenes Kira, and all of the other stuff that was going on, but I think it's only when she sees Han that she realises there's a way out. That's what I was playing. That's definitely where I was at. I don't think she felt herself to be strong enough at that point to go on and escape Dryden's grip. I think the Han is the slap around the face that made her go, I was a whole person, I was this other thing, where have the last 3 years gone? And basically she says she'd love to see her come into Disney Plus, but she's heard nothing from Disney. What do you think about that? She's mega keen to do more with Kira.
Yeah, she is, isn't she? She's almost canvassing at a Samuel L. Jackson kind of level, to be honest, I think. The way she's talking about it, I mean, we don't know, rightly or wrongly, whether or not there was any hints of discussion or even if the contracts that they were signed included some kind of clause for sequel films after the initial release of Solo. But it sounds like, yeah, she's definitely fond of the character, and rightly so, because, you know, I think she was definitely one of the most interesting characters from Solo. Lando and Han were Lando and Han, and we kind of know what to get from them. But Kira was that unknown quantity, and the way things were left at the end of the film, well, there's so much they could do with that character, especially with Darth Maul being now in the mix, running Crimson Dawn. So it suddenly kind of opened everything up. It is a shame that we haven't had anything else. We haven't had a Star Wars Solo sequel, or, you know, no hint of anything in a upcoming TV series. But then again, who knows? Who knows what happens with maybe the Lando series? Maybe there's a way to fold her in. That quote that she says about, she's heard nothing, absolutely nothing. I loved Kira, loved her, really, really did. I loved Han, I loved the story, I loved the people, and I loved the experience. It doesn't seem like there's any negativity about the production process or anything. She just seemed to like have a really good, positive time about it.
Solo was filmed, from the people that I know that worked on it, all said it was pretty much the most fun they had on the film. We all know that there was issues with, you know, Lord and Miller moving off and Howard coming in. But for what ended up on screen, yes, massive upheaval, obviously ridiculously expensive process. I think you come out the back end of Solo, it's like, I really want to see what this Han and Chewie do next. I want to know what Lando did next without the Falcon. I want to know what Kira did next. You know, there's a lot of questions. I want to know more about Enfys Nest. There's so many things out the back of this that you want to know more of. And it's the one project that you never got. So hopefully her, like you say, she is essentially canvassing. And funny, you mentioned Samuel L. Jackson, because this week he was told, or we've all been told, that he's going to be given an honorary Oscar in 2022. So fantastic news for Samuel L. Jackson. Solo, a Star Wars story, increasingly as time goes on, especially right now with War of the Bounty Hunters, it just, Solo feels very relevant. Kira's come back into that storyline. Let's hope there is a future for the characters of Solo.
Hello, I'm Ahmed Best, and you're listening to Fantha Tracks.
So the famous quote from Raiders of the Lost Ark was, it's not the years, it's the mileage. But in this case, it is the years and it is the mileage. Harrison Ford, 78 years old, has injured his shoulder rehearsing a fight scene on Indiana Jones 5, which hasn't got a title yet, but fingers crossed we get one soon. Not an awful lot to say about this other than get well soon, Harry. I mean, you know, at any age you can pull your shoulder out. Goodness knows I've done it plenty of times, tying my shoelaces. But on a big film like this, it's not the first time he's got injured on a Lucasfilm production, and certainly not the first time he's been injured on an Indiana Jones film.
Yeah, so you do wonder actually how much the insurance premiums are to cover him with his track record, but also, like you said, you know, just the age. As we know, the older you get, you know, you don't bounce as well as you once did. And I'm speaking from a, you know, as a 40-year-old, not a 78-year-old. So, yeah, it's also interesting and exciting to hear that clearly he's being physical in this film. This is not him just sat in an armchair reminiscing about days gone by. So that's quite cool.
It is. I mean, like you say, technology being what it is now, yeah, we just mentioned Samuel L. Jackson. I'm going to mention him again. You know, Captain Marvel, they de-aged him by sort of 30 years. And clearly we've seen the dots on his face, so you've got to assume that they're doing the same for Harrison, certainly for parts of the film, if not all of it. But they could quite easily, if they wanted to, body double. There's things that they could do. But we've seen Harrison, you know, when he was over here filming up north, you know, he was out on his bike. We saw pictures of him in the States. He goes on these crazy bike rides to stay fit. He's still great shape for a guy of 60, let alone nearly 80. So, you know, he clearly can do it. It just sounds like he's maybe overextended a bit or just, you know, overdone it a bit. It can happen to the best of us. So certainly not on any level as bad as the injury he had on Force Awakens, which was horrible. But yeah, fingers crossed the production moves ahead there. I think they will just do what they generally do and rejig the shoot like they did on Temple of Doom. I mean, famously, you know, did his back terribly, did his back on Temple of Doom. I think he was off the production for 6 weeks, and I think, was it Vic Armstrong was body doubling for Harrison for most of that film. A lot of what you think is Indy played by Harrison in that film is actually Vic Armstrong, which kind of proves that The Mandalorian not having Pedro Pascal in the suit at all times, it's not the first time they've done it. It's movie magic, isn't it?
It absolutely is.
Fantha Tracks. Hoodoo!
Rogue Squadron from director Patty Jenkins. It's set for a 22nd of December 2023 release. The film is starting to ramp up now. They've announced that its writer is Matthew Robinson, who wrote Dora and the Lost City of Gold. Great film if you've not seen it. Monster Trucks, he worked with Ricky Gervais on The Invention of Lying, so he's clearly got a sense of humour, and he's going to make what Patty Jenkins hopes will be the greatest fighter pilot movie ever made. That's a big sell. What do you think?
Big sell, especially Top Gun 2's coming out this year. So,
True.
You know, we might actually have something fairly recent to kind of compare it to. But yeah, I mean, he's got an interesting wide variety of work. So that's actually quite good sometimes, because I think if you're too narrow, you then end up just reusing the same tropes and stuff like that. Yeah. Whereas I think it shows he's got experience, and that it might actually bring in different elements and maybe things that we aren't necessarily thinking about to bring into Star Wars. So exciting times. Rogue Squadron sometimes I think gets forgotten about a little bit. It seems like we are so now focused on Kenobi and Andor, and that we forget that actually we could be bums on seats in a theatre watching a new Star Wars film in 2023.
I can't wait. The thought of being in the cinema again for a Star Wars film, because I think the sequel trilogy, I can't believe it came and went so fast.
So quick.
So quick. And we had Solo and Rogue One in amongst that as well. And Mando started. So now we feel like we're in the television era. Now to think of it, of getting to a premiere again, getting to a press screening again, you trooping at a premiere again, whatever it might be, it's exciting again. And this is what I always feel about Star Wars is the circus coming to town. It's like when there's a bit of a gap, it becomes an event again. Rogue Squadron feels like it could be the event. And I'm so pleased you mentioned that we're all talking about Kenobi right now. And we're very much talking about Andor. Until Andor started filming and there was news about that production, Andor was the one that got forgotten. And now that's very pressing on people's minds. So it makes me think that this isn't just going to be a straight down the line Top Gun style adrenaline film. There's going to be more to it than that. I think it's an interesting choice.
Hi, this is Dave Chapman, and you're listening to Fantha Tracks.
The showrunner of The Acolyte, Leslye Headland, has been talking to the AV Club, and she goes into some detail about her love of the galaxy far, far away. She certainly does make it very clear that Star Wars is something different to every person and how everybody's got their own little area of Star Wars that they love. A galaxy that's so enormous, we all come in at different points and there's different things that we love about it. What did you think about the conversation that AV Club had with her?
I think that Leslye Headland is a really interesting person, and I think she's got some really astute observations about Star Wars, and I think in particular the prequel trilogy. She even uses the term tone poem, which is a phrase that George was using to describe the whole prequel trilogy, really, or at least the prequel trilogy and how it relates to the original trilogy. It starts to tackle some big topics about how, obviously with war, there's a certain aspect to it which is political, and George was quite political in some of his commentary and more obliquely, I think, in the prequel trilogy again than he was in the original trilogy. But still, this actually has the foundations of somebody who really understands Star Wars on at least a filmmaker level, not necessarily specific beats and stuff to recreate, but actually the themes and the tone from the prequel trilogy, which, based on the timeline, the Acolyte should kind of run into the back end of the prequel trilogy within about 10 or 15 years. She's definitely studying that prequel trilogy, and it's going to be quite interesting and a breath of fresh air to kind of see Star Wars again at that end of the era.
It feels like her story is the fall of a time period. Phantom Menace, the prequel trilogy, was the fall of the Republic, wasn't it? One of the things I really liked about how she speaks and her enthusiasm for Star Wars, quite selfishly, she wrote fanfic, which I used to do. She was a big role player, gamer. She's into all of that stuff. Coming at it from a fanfic point of view, coming at it from a role play point of view, where the fate of a character literally is determined by the roll of a dice. I mean, that's what lights me up. She mentions that the writer's room has got people in it that aren't Star Wars fans, some that haven't even seen it. Mm-hmm. That's a healthy thing.
That's a massively healthy thing. And I actually even think that going back to an interview that Ronald D. Moore did when he was in the room with George, when they were writing what was meant to be the Star Wars Underworld series, George had two sets of writers. He had the camp that were Star Wars fans and knew Star Wars like Ronald D. Moore, like through and through, and then the camp of writers who didn't know Star Wars. And I think it's really healthy to have that kind of balance because, one, you're not constantly thinking about, oh, well, this has already happened and somebody's done this. You want somebody to kind of go, hang on a sec, this is what this means to his character. This character would then do that, irrespective of what it means and how it would affect, say, continuity, because that's something to worry about further down the line. You've got to build and flesh out the frame of a story before you start to worry too much. You need people there to breathe a fresh life into Star Wars. And so you need new blood to come in. You need new voices. So you need new women and you need minorities and that to breathe different perspectives of what Star Wars means to them, to see what actually, when you then put it all into a melting pot, what you can then create. Because ultimately there will still be people, and hopefully with somebody like Leslye Headland who's showrunning it, you'll be able to boil down all these good ideas and come up with a new and interesting Star Wars story. And I think from what I've understood, Acolyte's meant to be more of a investigative type thriller, type political kind of intrigue story anyway, which is something that we haven't really had in Star Wars beyond what we probably saw I think in Attack of the Clones.
Yeah, Ben going off and Obi-Wan, I should say, going off and trying to figure out the whole Camino mystery and Jango Fett and all that. That is that mystery element. Then John Williams' music it's all mystery music. With the way she talks about her relationship to Star Wars, it feels like it's going to be very grounded within Star Wars. And I think you make a great point about having writers come in who've got no knowledge of Star Wars. They just want to write great stories and worry about the details after. But I think Headland here has shown that she wants to include as many aspects of the Star Wars story as possible. She wants to include all kinds of people within it. I just came out of reading the interview with the vibe of like, this is in the hands of somebody that really effing loves Star Wars.
Yeah, me too. And I think that's where it's going to be so interesting and exciting to see how that one shapes and develops over the next couple of years whenever it comes out. I wonder, and obviously it's impossible, I think, for me and you to do, but if we were to kind of put like an invisible wall in our mind and literally filter out anything that is not in the new canon and just get rid of all the bits and bobs that we know from, West End games and legends and comics and stuff like that, and then approach some of these properties again and actually have a conversation. Would we, A, have the same problems? B, would we want the same kind of solutions? And C, would we even have to worry and consider about stuff like planetary locations and travel times and stuff like that? I mean, so it's really interesting, isn't it? Because obviously there's a big thing with legends and the minutiae, and I mean, even down to people really kind of got irked about the fact that, they called coffee calf and, they didn't go to the toilets, they went to refreshers. And I actually thought, personally, for me, that's the kind of stuff that just kind of creates a different universe, that separates the Star Wars universe from just our universe, because otherwise it just kind of then becomes just another sci-fi thing which happens either before or after us. So I think that in itself is an interesting thing. So I'll be interested to see if she starts to also pull in some RPG influences and little nods here and there to the West End game stuff. I mean, she may have played it, but she may not actually have either consciously ingested it and really kind of paid a huge amount of attention to the minutiae kind of, let's say, the layout of a cantina or something on Mos Eisley. But that's where people like the Story Group and Leland Chi and, Pablo Hidalgo, they're the ones who were kind of charged, weren't they, to really help with that and kind of massage these stories to kind of get them to fit, which I think is probably a good term to really think about what, maybe the Story Group should be doing. If it was something really fundamentally not working, let's say like a Sith Force Ghost, something really fundamental to the way the Force works, I think that's probably when they would say, that's not how the Force works.
Good quote.
Thank you. But then whether or not they just say, no, that's not how the Force works, or that's not how the Force has worked before, so let's see if we can get this to work in something that would be acceptable, which would kind of fit the confines of like what Star Wars is. I mean, it's a really interesting conversation, isn't it? It's like, what fundamentally is the bare bones of Star Wars when you write stuff, and ultimately it's got to come down to relationships, and you've got to start with the big overarching themes and then whittle it down from there. And it's obviously when you get down to the whittling and the minutiae, that's when contradictions happen. They might just get glossed over. It might be such a small thing that actually the Story Group kind of goes, well, it's not ideal, but, we're not going to change it, or we can't change it at this point. It's too late.
For everything in one location, daily news, reviews, interviews, podcasts, video and social media feeds, bookmark fanthatracks.com for Star Wars news 24/7, 365.
So this weekend saw the very first running of LEGOCon 2021. It covered every aspect of the LEGO universe, including Star Wars. Panther Tracks had 3 reveals. We had a first look at the Imperial Light Cruiser, the Imperial Armoured Marauder, and Boba Fett's Starship. All available on the 1st of August. Let's have a little look at them first. So the Imperial Light Cruiser, $159.99. That's dollars, not pounds, but probably will be pounds. 1,336 pieces. What do you make of this little beauty? Fennec Shand is in there as the figure as well.
Yeah, it looks great. This is a real kind of Mandalorian pack, isn't it? Mando, Cara, Grogu, man. I wonder how big Grogu is. I mean, what's the typical size of a minifig? About an inch, is it?
Yeah, they've done well to make him. I've got to say, he is dinky. Dina's got his Beskar staff, Cara Dune's in there, so that tells you how long ago this set was probably planned and made. Fennec Shand, obviously. There's the Darksaber with Moff Gideon, and then one of those really awesome-looking Dark Troopers.
What's missing from there is a Luke Skywalker. That would have been awesome.
Yeah, that would have been awesome. Yeah, that would have been very cool.
But it's cool because it looks like it comes with some TIE fighters and plenty of kind of scope to play around with. And you got like the turbo laser batteries and that, which have nice blaster bolts and that. So it's a fun little set, actually. Well, actually, to be fair, probably not that small, I guess.
No,
I don't actually know.
no.
It's 1,300 odd pieces. That's going to be fairly big, I'd think.
Sticking with the Mandalorian, we've got the Imperial Armoured Marauder. $39.99, probably 40 quid over here. 478 pieces, so obviously significantly smaller. But with this one, you get Grief Karga, you get 2 stormtroopers, and you get an artillery stormtrooper with the yellow flashes on his armour. So there's 4 figures with that set. Really nice set. I mean, it's a great sequence from the show, that whole speeder chase down the canyon. So good little set, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a nice set and a decent price point, I think. So that's quite accessible for collectors and the less hardcore kids level of Lego, I guess you'd say, because that's enough figures to kind of play around with and create some fun and excitement. And of course, it's always great to see, those armoured transports, I think.
Now, the third set that's coming out, as I said, all coming out on the 1st of August. Boba Fett's Starship, $49.99. I'm not even going to say pounds or dollars because it's probably the same. 593 pieces. It's no UCS Slave One, but it's a sizable ship. 2 Lego minifigures with this. You get Fett with his blaster and Mando with his blaster rifle and his spear. And there's a carbonite brick to add to the creative play possibilities, which I really like the way to phrase that.
Hey man, it's me, Kevin Smith, Star Wars fan, Fantha Tracks fan.
Episode 9 of The Bad Batch first season landed on Friday. Bounty lost. I thought this was a cracking episode. Loads of action, loads of adventure. Omega as a character developing even more, and there's loads to think about there concerning her lineage and history. First impressions, what did you make of this one, Mark?
Belter of an episode, I thought. Yeah, just kind of action-packed. Whenever you get the chance to see 2 bounty hunters face off like that in animation or even live action, I think it's awesome. I mean, it's something that I think we take for granted that happens quite a bit in the comics with like bounty hunters, but actually we don't get to see it very often in TV or on screen. So seeing actually like Fennec and Cad Bane just kind of go at each other, I think was awesome. Plus, obviously, we've got some really big reveals, which has really helped answer some questions as to who and what is important of Omega. And I think also just knowing that there's other cloning operations around the galaxy is quite interesting as well. I mean, even though this one was run down about it, looked stunning. The cloud and all the volumetric kind of particles and stuff like that they used just to kind of create the atmosphere in this episode just looked stonkers. So I think it was just a really fun, rapid fire, strong episode.
Totally agree. Obviously, the big takeaway is learning that Omega is Omega and that Alpha is Boba Fett, taken from Jango's DNA, so that they are essentially brother and sister. But that's going to bear fruit not only in the Bad Batch, but quite potentially in Book of Boba Fett as well. So that was a biggest whoa moment. It's the second episode in a row where I thought a character had died, because I thought Hunter was gone last week when Cad Bane gunned him down. And this episode, when Fennec kicked Cad Bane over the ledge when she'd got his arms all tied up on Borovio and he went over the edge, I thought, wow, he's gone. I can't believe it. I mean, obviously she can't die. We know she can't die, but Cad Bane can certainly die. But then he's got his rockets, his boot rockets that kept him going. So that was a smart little move. The design of Borovio was beautiful. The space sequence at the beginning with Crosshair chasing them down was great action. Just so many good little moments. Some plot conveniences. But you've got to assume, for the purposes of the story, that where the Batch were on Braca and where Borovio isn't a massive distance away, so they were able to get to her in time. The way that they made that work, because they kind of had a location, but they needed the power surge to sort of hone in on her. All that made sense in the realms of the story, so that was great. I'm becoming so invested in Omega as a character. What about you?
I say she's grown on me, but she's not really, because I think I was quite enamoured with her from the get-go. So I kind of really believed in her, and I've kind of believed in the characterization of her as well. It's interesting when you think about it. You've basically got the Prime Minister of Kamino, who's trying to undermine the Empire.
Yeah.
And then you've got Nala Se, who is trying to undermine the efforts of the Prime Minister.
Yeah.
Yet he's trying to undermine the Empire. So, they're kind of working slightly against each other, but then we don't know, because there's probably either a conversation they've had off screen or if they've yet to have, but we don't actually know what the Prime Minister per se wants with Omega. I'm guessing it's probably going to be more of a case of just keep her safe somewhere. That's my impression, is that's what he wants to do. Is he basically wants to try and extricate the technology and get her maybe hidden somewhere so that then they can use her for something. But then again, I don't even know what the business sense of that would be, because if the clones are basically being paid for by the Empire, and the Empire don't want them, then what do? Do you just sell the technology to, I guess, the rebels? Or
I've had a thought on this. Because the Emperor spent all those years during the prequel trilogy playing the face of the Republic as the Chancellor, but also he is Darth Sidious, and he's literally playing both sides, and he can't lose, essentially. So he's so used to playing both sides. I think that the person who's dealing with the Prime Minister is probably Sidious or Palpatine himself. I think this is the start of tying in the whole Exegol thing. There's quite a possibility that the cloning that we know comes to play with Snoke later on down the line, the Emperor himself, that technology in my head has got to go back to Kamino at some point. So I think that Kamino will still be there. It's still off the map galactically. It doesn't show up on the charts. It's still a hidden location. Kamino will be used for the purposes of the Emperor. That's my guess. You look at Lama Su as the bad guy because he only wants Omega for her DNA. And you look at Nala Se as the good guy because she's got her best interests at heart now. She cares for Omega as a character, not just because of the fact that she's genetically important and the last link to that whole clone army thing. Tornway gets sent to meet with Fennec Shan. Tornway gets one line and dies, which was like, I did not expect that.
That, I reckon, is because that was the only one line where they could repurpose from Attack of the Clones, which actually probably made sense in the context of this episode. I don't think they re-recorded the actress, but it sounded like the actress, so I guess they just lifted it from Attack of the Clones.
Rena Owen is credited in the scene, but then Ian McDiarmid was credited in the first episode, and that was his lines from Revenge of the Sith. So you're right, It could well be that. But nevertheless, there's so much going on in this episode. People being pitted against people. Now you've got two bounty hunters hired by Kaminoans, both trying to bring in Omega. And thankfully, she's intuitive and ingenious enough to figure a way out of it, keeping Todo at length, getting in that pod, getting picked up by the batch, getting away at the end. Fennec disables the Justifiers engines, which was a good little scene. I just love this episode. I thought that it was so fascinating to see. And next episode 10, now that Omega is starting to realise that there's more to her than even she knows, that she is very special and important to so many people. Now, in the last, 7 episodes of season 1, that could really start to blossom and open out now, because you could argue she's one of the most wanted people in the galaxy, and she's done nothing wrong.
Yeah, damn right. I thought it was really interesting. I didn't freeze frame it, but I was really intrigued by the cloning cylinders, which had that off-green water in it and stuff, which obviously, again, looks very much like Exegol. I'm not sure that the tank that topples onto Fennec, did that actually have a Kamino in it?
That's hard to tell.
I don't think it was Snoke. I mean, I generally don't think that they would be kind of planting a Snoke seed this early on in the timeline. No. But at the same time, there's a part of me that thinks if the Emperor is just working with the Kaminoan Prime Minister in the shadows and indirectly, why they spent so long and they couldn't perfect the cloning? Because you think if they can make perfect clones back in the sequel era trilogy, then it would be pretty much an easier process to make clones later on. I almost kind of think that maybe Kaminoans know that the writings on the wall, they're possibly going to get wiped out like the Geonosians did, and then whoever comes along later picks up whatever scraps of technology the Kaminoans have left, either from Cloud Kamino or the main Kamino, and then that's what gets moved to Exegol. Because I just feel like there is a big span of time between where we are in the timeline and when we next see the iteration of Emperor Palpatine that dies in Rise of Skywalker.
Yeah. I suppose the one difference, though, the difference is that I know it's Admiral Rampart that's very keen on enlisting people and getting rid of the clones.
Yeah.
And I think maybe if the Emperor has that technology himself, if he's the only one with that technology, and there can't be that many people around the galaxy with that technology, that must be something that's kept very close. Like there's only so many countries on Earth that have nukes, because it is a weapon of mass destruction if they use it in the wrong way. The difference is that when you get to the era of Snoke and Palpatine clones, for example, they can use the Force. That's the next mega level of cloning, is can you make a clone that can be powerful in the Force, because Snoke was. And Palpatine was a clone that used the Force. They're not just vessels. Regular clones, you've got to assume, can't. But if you clone from a Sith or you clone from a Jedi, does the clone have the capacity to use the Force? I don't know. I'm just spitballing, but I'm guessing that must be the next level of how do you get a midichlorian to survive within a clone's body?
Hello, this is Sam Whitwer, and you are listening to Fantha Tracks.
One thing I only noticed on the second time around watching was Cad Bane's metal plate in his head. Did you see that?
Yes.
I think this confirms that Cad Bane Boba Fett duel that was meant to happen. Was it in season 5 or something, or season 6?
6, I think. Yeah.
Which didn't then actually make its way to TV. Still actually kind of happens in canon, which I thought was pretty cool. In that case, I'm starting to think that maybe, we might actually see a very young Boba Fett in this. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I think initially watching the episode, I just took it at face value. And then somebody on Friday said, he's got the skull. He's obviously had the encounter with Boba Fett. Dug into the old Wikipedia and was like, oh, yes, of course, that was one of the missing stories. To your point, yes, I think there's quite a possibility that he will, because now, where was that in the Clone Wars when we saw a young Boba Fett? It was fairly early after Attack of the Clones, so you're probably 4 years on that. So you've got to think Fett now, he's a bit older than Omega, isn't he? He's probably 15, 16.
Yeah, I'd say that. So again, that's the interesting thing about the Alpha and Omega is obviously the age difference. So obviously they felt the need to change or alter the genetics to create a female clone, but there's quite a big gap, isn't there, in terms of age? So there must have been a reason for them to have to create Omega beyond the fact that they just wanted a female version of Daniel Logan running around the galaxy.
That's true. But also, I mean, now we're getting way out into the weeds now, but if they've created a female clone of Jango Fett in the same way that Boba was a male clone of Jango Fett because Jango wanted a son as part of his payment from Dooku. One, who came up with the idea of creating Omega? If it wasn't Jango, presumably he had nothing to do with it. This is something the Kaminoans have done off their own back as almost an insurance policy, because she'd never left Kamino. She was kept close to the Kaminoans, so she was safe as you could possibly be on a planet nobody knows exists in that sense, and is a complete innocent until she leaves with the batch. Why was she created? What was the reasoning for it? I think the Kaminoans are thinking, well, okay, she's first generation. Any offspring of hers, natural offspring of hers, would be second generation. I think she's kind of their insurance policy, which is why the Prime Minister's so desperate to get her back.
I guess it's that very Star Wars trope of it being analog. They can't just keep a digital version of the DNA on file. They physically need cells to create these clones. And I guess that's probably what it is. If you've got a unaltered clone, as it were, then potentially the lifespan for you to dip into that genetic pool is going to be 50, 60 or 80 years or something like that. So you've got that insurance policy. Cloning probably is like dubbing an audio cassette from one to another to another to another. So imperfections kind of creak in.
Degradations and such.
Exactly. This series is definitely hotting up, but also actually we're now in a really good position because actually we don't really know where they're going to go from here. I mean, my guess is that they still probably need to get away from Sid, really, or kind of like close off that relationship. So whether or not they go back there for the start of the next episode, or they just realise maybe it's not safe enough to kind of go anywhere and just keep on hopping from planet to planet. It's a bit of a blank canvas, I think, at the moment. I mean, I suppose it comes down to if bounty hunters are going to be in pursuit. Now, obviously, Fennec's been told that she doesn't need to pursue Omega, so it's whether or not Cad Bane has been called off as well, which I'm guessing the Prime Minister probably still wants her, so therefore there's still a threat and there's still a risk. So whether or not he then doubles down and brings in more bounty hunters or increases the bounty and maybe makes it a complete open season and anybody who wants to have a crack, have a crack.
Yeah, you got to keep the characters in peril. I never thought that we'd get so deep into the thought processes, not only of the characters, but everything that's going on around it on a show like this so early in this season, because of course with the Clone Wars, we knew what happened between Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith. We knew what was at stake. We knew where the pieces were left and where they had to meet up with that whole series. And it did it beautifully. But now, in this sort of post-Order 66, post-Fall of the Republic era, it is quite a blank canvas. One of the things that came up in the press conference, the round table, this question I asked was, did you always intend for the world building and the development of the galaxy to be as primary to the show as the characters are? And their response, Brad Rao and Jennifer Corbett, was very much so, yes, this is definitely our chance to lay out what this era was all about, because the galaxy goes through an absolute sea change. And we're seeing it already in like 9 episodes of The Bad Batch. Chain codes coming in, the clamping down on freedom of travel, currency change, things that seem quite boring on the face of it. But actually, if you think about it, they're massive things.
Exactly. In context with its galaxy, massive.
So I'm thrilled with The Bad Batch. I think it's been absolute breath of fresh air. And this episode, like you say, was a stonker.
Well, that's all we've got time for. Thanks for listening. If you've got a question, by all means send it in, and your opinions are always welcome about anything you want to talk about. Bad Batch, news stories that we've discussed on the show, and things that we haven't even covered. But to do that, you need to know how you're going to send us an email. And for that, we have to call on our good friend, Mr. Newbold, because he can tell us how to do it.
If you want to be a part of the action and stay updated on all the latest Star Wars news, visit fanthatracks.com or check out the free Fanthatracks app through the App Store to follow us on your mobile device. Thank you, Mark. You can reach out to us and send in your listeners' questions by emailing radio@fanthatracks.com. Get some questions in. We want to talk about all sorts of stuff. We will talk about anything. Comment, like, and share on any of our social media feeds @Fanthatracks, and be sure to subscribe, leave a review, preferably a 5-star one, on Amazon Music, Audible, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or your podcatcher or smart speaker of choice. And as always, thanks to James Semple for composing the Fanthatracks intro, Adam O'Brien for our Making Tracks opening music, and Mark Daniel and Vanessa Marshall for our voiceovers. Remember to tune into our weekly Fanthatracks news show, Good Morning Tatooine, live Sunday evenings at 9 o'clock UK time, 4 PM Eastern, 1 PM Pacific on Facebook and YouTube. It's always with Brian. Your guest is different every week. Tune in, have a listen, and join in with the show because you can message live and get your questions on air.
Brilliant. Stay safe, dude. Have a good week. No doubt I will catch you for episode 98 next weekend. Obviously, our 100th episode is rapidly approaching, which we have to have a good think about what we can do to mark this special occasion beyond buying more Star Wars stuff. Everybody else, thank you for listening. It is appreciated. Stay safe, wear a mask, get vaccinated if you haven't already. Take care, and may the Force be with you.
Coming up next on Fanthatracks Radio, it's another episode of Making Tracks.